Leave now. That was my Christmas gift from my only son. He pointed at the door, his eyes colder than the buffalo snow waiting outside. I thought hearing him disown me was the end of my world. I was wrong. The real end began at 2:11 in the morning with a frantic knock on my apartment door. The stranger standing there carried a name we had buried deep enough to rot. My name is Marianne Caldwell. I spent 30 years working for the Northbridge Integrity Bureau, sifting through the trash of corrupt officers to find the one receipt that didn't match the salary. You develop a certain instinct for rot. You smell it before you see it. And the moment I stepped into my son's foyer on Christmas Eve, the air reeked of it. The house in the Williamsville suburbs was a picture of American perfection. Garland wrapped the banister, and the scent of cinnamon pine cones was strong enough to choke a horse. But the temperature in the room was absolute zero. Evan stood by the fireplace, nursing a scotch that looked too dark to be his first. Beside him stood Rowan Hale, my daughter-in-law's mother, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. I patted the velvet box in my coat pocket. It was the last thing my husband, Frank, had left for Evan. A vintage watch he had restored himself. I had waited for the right moment to give it to him. "Merry Christmas," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. I looked around. "Where is Tessa? I brought her the ginger cookies she likes." Evan did not look at me. He looked at the Persian rug. "Tessa is... she isn't feeling well. She's upstairs resting." My internal alarm bells went off. Tessa never missed Christmas. She was the one who insisted on these dinners. I looked at the dining table. It was set for 4, but one chair had been pulled back slightly, almost like an afterthought. An empty seat at a holiday table is never just furniture. It is a warning. "I'll go up and say hello," I said, taking a step toward the stairs. She shouldn't be alone. Rowan moved. She did not rush, but she glided into my path with the precision of a shark cutting through water. "That won't be necessary. Marianne? She needs sleep. You know how delicate she gets." I looked at Evan. He was sweating despite the chill I felt radiating from them. "Evan, is everything okay?" He set his glass down on the mantel with a clatter. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were glossy and vacant. It was the look of a man reciting a confession he had memorized under duress. "You need to go," Evan said. I blinked. "Excuse me. Leave now," he said, his voice rising a shaky octave. "I want you out of my house. You are no longer family." The words hung there, absurd and violent. I took the velvet box out of my pocket, my hand trembling just once before I steadied it. "Evan? What are you talking about? This is Dad's. I don't want it," he shouted. He took a step forward, his finger jabbing the air. You have ruined my life enough. You're controlling. You suffocate us. That contract I lost last week, that was you. It was all you." I stared at him. I had not spoken to his business partners in 5 years. The accusation was not just a lie, it was a bad lie. It was a script written by someone who did not know our history, someone who just needed generic bullet points to justify an execution. "Evan," I said, keeping my voice level, the way I used to speak to cops who were about to crack. "I haven't touched your business. Look at me. Who told you to say this?" He flinched for a second. The mask slipped, and I saw a terrified boy looking for an exit. But then Rowan placed a hand on his shoulder. Her nails were painted a blood red that matched the holly berries on the mantel. She squeezed his shoulder, a subtle prompt. Evan stiffened, Get out if you don't leave. I'm calling the police." Rowan smiled. It was a thin thing, sharp as a razor blade. "Please, Marianne, do not make this difficult. Don't embarrass the family on Christmas." She opened the front door. The wind from Lake Erie howled in, biting my skin. Evan marched over, grabbed my arm, and shoved me. He did not guide me out. He physically pushed his 58-year-old mother onto the porch. I stumbled, but caught myself on the railing. The snow was already drifting high against the brick. I turned around, ready to scream, ready to demand to see Tessa, but the heavy oak door slammed in my face. Then I heard it. Click, click. The deadbolt and the privacy lock. I stood there in the freezing dark, staring at the wreath on the door. My investigator brain kicked in over my broken heart. You lock a door once to keep the cold out. You lock it twice to keep something in. Evan was not locking a mother out after a family fight. He was locking a vault. The silence in my apartment was heavy, the kind that presses against your eardrums until they ache. I sat on the edge of my sofa, still wearing my damp wool coat. My hands were shaking, not just from the buffalo winter that had seeped into my bones, but from the shock of having my own son erase me from his life. I looked down at the velvet box in my lap. I had told myself it was a watch, just to keep the surprise. But I knew what Frank had really left for Evan. I pried the lid open. Inside, resting on the silk lining, was a small, silver key to a safety deposit box and a folded scrap of yellowed paper. Frank's handwriting was jagged. "If the day comes when you lie, son, you will lie big." I stared at the note. Frank had seen something in Evan that I had refused to see. A weakness, a pliability. Then the knock came. It was 2:11 in the morning. I knew the time because the red digits of my microwave clock were the only light in the room. The knock was not a neighborly tap. It was a rhythmic, frantic pounding that demanded an answer. I moved to the door, my hip holstered with an imaginary weapon I no longer carried. I peered through the peephole. A woman in a thick parka with scrub pants peeking out the bottom stood next to a uniformed patrol officer. I opened the door, leaving the chain on. "Can I help you?" The woman stepped forward into the slice of light. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red. "Are you Marianne Caldwell, mother of Evan Caldwell I am?" I said, my voice rasping. "I'm Callie Rourke. I'm a nurse at St. Bridget Medical Center. I need you to confirm something about your daughter-in-law, Tessa. Because the chart says you are unaffiliated and irrelevant, I undid the chain and threw the door wide. Irrelevant. What are you talking about?" Whereas Tessa Callie exchanged a look with the officer before turning back to me. "Tessa is in the ICU. She is unresponsive. Complications from labor." The world tilted on its axis. Labor. "She isn't due for another 3 weeks. I was just at their house. They said she was sleeping." "She wasn't sleeping." "Mrs. Caldwell," Callie said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "She's been at St. Bridget's since 4 o'clock this afternoon. But that isn't why I risked my job coming here. The family, your son, and a woman named Rowan gave specific instructions to security. They said Evan's biological mother is a threat to the patient and is not to be admitted under any circumstances." I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold as ice. "He told you I was a threat. They filed an emergency change of medical proxy." Callie continued, speaking fast now, as if running out of time. "It was time-stamped tonight, post-dinner. Right after they claim you caused a scene at their home?" The pieces clicked together with the deafening snap of a loaded gun, the empty chair, the refusal to let me go upstairs. Evan's staged outburst. The accusations that sounded like bad dialogue. It wasn't a family fight. It was a preemptive strike. They needed a documented incident to justify barring me from the hospital before I could ask questions. They needed me gone so they could control the narrative of whatever was happening in that hospital room. Rowan's smile flashed in my memory. Don't make this difficult. She wasn't protecting a holiday dinner. She was protecting a crime scene. The trembling in my hands stopped. The grief that had been choking me 5 minutes ago evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard clarity I hadn't felt since I turned in my badge. I was not a heartbroken mother anymore. I was an investigator looking at a suspect list. I turned away from the door and walked to the closet. I stripped off my damp coat and grabbed my heavy storm jacket. I reached into the desk drawer and pulled out my old leather notebook and a fresh pen. I walked back to the door, buttoning my coat. I looked Callie Rourke dead in the eye. "I'm not crying," I said, my voice flat and dangerous. "Take me to the hospital. Right now." St. Bridget Medical Center smelled the way all hospitals do at 3 a.m, like industrial cleaner, stale coffee, and quiet desperation. The fluorescent lights hummed with a sound that drilled right into the base of my skull. I walked past the security desk with my head down, flashing an old ID badge I had kept in my wallet for years. It was expired. But if you walk with enough authority, nobody looks at the date. I reached the double doors of the ICU. I expected to see Evan pacing the floor, tearing at his hair. Instead, I found Rowan Hale. She was standing directly in the center of the hallway, arms crossed, positioned perfectly to block the view of the nursing station. She looked immaculate, not a hair out of place, as if she were hosting a gala rather than keeping a vigil. She saw me and didn't even blink. "I told security you were not allowed here," Rowan said, her voice smooth and devoid of warmth. "Where is she?" I asked, stepping closer. "Where is my daughter-in-law?" Rowan sighed, a tragic, theatrical little sound. "She is gone. Marianne? Tessa? She didn't make it. The complications from the delivery were too severe. She passed 20 minutes ago. The family has already made arrangements. The air left my lungs. For a second, I was just a mother and a grandmother, crushed by the weight of the loss. But then I looked at Rowan's hands. They were steady, no wringing, no trembling. My training kicked in. I pulled my notebook from my pocket. "Who pronounced her?" I asked sharply. Rowan blinked, caught off guard. "What, the attending physician?" I said, pen hovering over the paper. "Name, time of death. Exact cause written on the certificate." Rowan hesitated. Her eyes darted to the left, a classic tell. "It was Dr. Evans, or Edwards." It was chaotic. "Listen, you need to leave. Security is on their way." "Dr. Edwards?" I repeated, writing down unknown, lying in my notebook. "And the room number. She is being moved to the morgue." Rowan snapped. "Go home, Marianne. Don't make a scene in front of the grieving staff." I lowered the notebook. I let my shoulders slump. I forced my face to crumble, channeling every ounce of pain I had felt when Frank died. I need a minute to pray. Just 1 minute in the chapel. Then I'll go." Rowan studied me, looking for cracks in my defeat, finding none. She nodded curtly. 1 minute? Then leave." I walked toward the chapel, dragging my feet until I turned the corner. The moment I was out of sight, I straightened up, I ducked into the emergency stairwell, stripping off my heavy storm jacket to reveal a dark grey cardigan underneath. I pulled a knit beanie from my pocket and pulled it low over my ears. I wasn't Marianne Caldwell anymore. I was just another exhausted visitor wandering the halls. I moved up one floor and came down the back hallway of the ICU. I stayed close to the wall, pretending to read a pamphlet on heart health. I scanned the rooms through the glass partitions. Room 4, room 5, room 6. I stopped. My breath hitched in my throat. Tessa was there. She was hooked up to a ventilator, tubes running in and out of her like a spider web. But the cardiac monitor was tracing a steady, rhythmic green line. Beep, beep, beep. Her chest rose and fell. She wasn't dead. She wasn't even close to the morgue. She was being erased while her heart was still beating. I pressed myself into the alcove of a supply closet as the door to room 6 opened. A doctor stepped out, followed by Evan. My son looked pale, but his eyes were dry. As I said, "Mr. Caldwell," the doctor said, keeping his voice low. "The neurological activity is minimal. However, state law requires a 30-day observation window before we can discuss withdrawing support, unless there is a prior directive." Evan rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't ask if she could hear him. He didn't ask about her chances of waking up. "What about the cost?" Evan asked, his voice shaking. "And the procedure? If we have the paperwork, can we expedite the 30 days we don't want her to suffer? It's not about suffering." "Evan," the doctor said gently, "it's about the law." "Right," Evan said, looking at his watch. "I just need to know the timeline. My mother-in-law handles the administration. I'll ask her." I stood in the shadows, my grip on the notebook tightening until my knuckles turned white. Evan wasn't grieving. He was negotiating a contract termination, and my living, breathing daughter-in-law was the liability they were trying to liquidate. I slipped into the alcove next to the consultation room, pressing my back against the cold drywall. The door was cracked open about 3 inches, a sliver of light spilling onto the linoleum floor. It is the most common mistake criminals make. They believe their power creates a soundproof barrier. They forget that sound travels just as easily through the cracks of a wealthy life as it does through a poor one. Inside, the air was thick with tension. I recognized Rowan's voice immediately. It was low, clipped, and devoid of any tremor. "We have already established the narrative," Rowan said. "We told the hospital staff that Marianne is unstable. We said she is no longer family. If she is not family, she has no voice. She has no standing to challenge the medical directives. 30 days is enough time to let the clock run out." I held my breath, my hand instinctively covering my mouth to stifle the sound of my own rage, but Evan's voice was thin, vibrating with a panic that made my stomach turn. What if she wakes up? The doctor said there was activity. If Tessa wakes up and sees the paperwork, if she sees I signed it. There was a pause, heavy and suffocating. Then Rowan answered, her tone as casual as if she were discussing a dinner reservation. "Then don't let her wake," Rowan said. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter draft. This was not negligence. This was active conspiracy. Then a third voice spoke up. It was female, young, and trembling. I recognized her from the few times I had visited Evan's office. Paige Mercer, his new executive assistant. I thought it was just paperwork. Paige stammered. I could hear the rustle of fabric, like she was wringing her hands. You said it was asset protection. You said it was about the trust fund. I didn't sign up for this. I can't be part of letting someone die. You are already part of it. Paige, Rowan snapped, the steel in her voice clashing against the girl's fear. You notarized the proxy. You sent the emails. If we go down, you go down as an accessory. So stop whining and listen. We keep the circle tight. A closed funeral. Immediate cremation. No autopsy. The outside world only needs one consistent story. Tragic complications from childbirth. But Paige's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. What about the baby in the NICU? The nurses. They still call it Baby B on the charts. If people find out there are two. My heart stopped. The hallway spun. Baby B. Tessa had not told me she was carrying twins. Or maybe she had tried to tell me, and I hadn't been listening closely enough. Baby B meant there was a baby A. It meant my son and his mother-in-law were not just hiding a murder. They were hiding a child. They were splitting a set of twins like they were divvying up assets in a portfolio. Focus. Paige, Evan said, his voice hardening, trying to mimic Rowan's strength, but failing. We handle one problem at a time. I had heard enough. If I stayed 1 second longer, I would burst through that door and do something that would get me arrested. And then I would be useless to Tessa and those babies. I forced my legs to move. I retreated backward, step by silent step, until I reached the stairwell. I didn't exhale until I burst out of the hospital doors and into the biting wind of the parking lot. The snow was falling harder now, burying the world in white silence. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb and stiff. I dialed the one number I hadn't called in 3 years. It rang twice. Vance, a gruff voice answered. Hector, I said, leaning against the frozen metal of my sedan. It's Marianne. I need you to wake up. I have a situation. Marianne. His voice shifted instantly from sleep to alert. What time is it? Are you okay? No, I said, staring up at the lit window on the 3rd floor where my daughter-in-law was fighting for her life against the people who should have loved her. I am at St. Bridget's. It's a homicide in progress. Hector. And the suspect is my son. Hector Vance arrived in a battered sedan that smelled of stale tobacco and old leather, a scent that instantly grounded me. He did not hug me. He simply unlocked the passenger door and waited for me to slide in. Hector was the best forensic accountant the Northbridge Integrity Bureau had ever seen. A man who could find a missing dime in a federal budget. He was also the only person I trusted to help me dismantle my own family. We don't go in kicking doors, Hector said, handing me a thermos of black coffee. You do that, they lawyer up, and the evidence vanishes. We build the noose, Marianne. Let them put their own heads in it. He was right. My rage was a liability. I had to convert it into fuel. We sat in the dark parking lot, the engine idling to keep the heater running, and mapped out a strategy of submission. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Evan. It tasted like bile to write it, but I needed him to believe I was defeated. Evan? You were right. I was emotional and out of line. I am going back to my apartment. Please, just tell me she is not in pain. I won't come back until you say it is okay. I hit send. Good. Hector grunted, tapping the steering wheel. Now he thinks he has won. A man who thinks he has won gets sloppy. Hector opened his briefcase and pulled out a small, high-fidelity recording device. New York is a one-party consent state, but hospitals are tricky zones. However, if they invite you into a private space or speak in a public one, it is fair game. I spoke to my contact at the district attorney's office. We need them to state the intent. We need them to say the words. The next morning, I went back to the hospital, not as a storm, but as a ghost. I waited by the staff entrance until I saw Callie Rourke coming off her shift. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue. She didn't stop walking when she saw me, but she slowed her pace just enough for me to fall in step beside her. "I can't show you the files." "Mrs. Caldwell," Callie said, looking straight ahead. "The digital logs are flagged. If I access them again, I get fired. I'm not asking you to break the law." "Callie," I said quietly, "I'm asking you how to save her." Callie stopped at the corner, adjusting her scarf. "The ethics committee. They are the only ones who can override a proxy if there is a suspicion of malicious intent. But you can't just walk in. You need to file a formal request for a review of process, not a review of medical care. Use those exact words, and do it before Tuesday." She walked away before I could thank her. I had my direction. Now I needed the ammunition. That afternoon, Hector and I set up a war room in his basement office. I still had access to view the transaction history of an old joint account Evan had set up years ago when he bought the house. He had likely forgotten my name was still attached as a secondary viewer. I scrolled through the ledger, my eyes scanning the dates. "Got you," I whispered. "What is it?" Hector asked, leaning over my shoulder. "Look at the date," I said, pointing to the screen. "December 24th, 9 p.m. 2 hours after they kicked me out. A wire transfer of $250,000. That is a lot of cash for a holiday withdrawal," Hector noted, his brow furrowing. "Where did it go to a holding company?" I said, "Meridian Family Endowment. It's marked as a charitable donation. But who donates $250,000 while their wife is dying in the ICU?" The motive was taking shape. It wasn't just about hating me. It was about money. It was always about money. Then, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Rowan Hale. The subject line read, "A new beginning." I opened it. It was a digital invitation, tasteful and elegant, featuring a stock photo of a sleeping infant. "Please join us this Sunday at the Hale residence to welcome baby Charlotte. A quiet gathering for close friends and family to support Evan during this difficult transition." I stared at the screen. Tessa was lying in a hospital bed, her body acting as a prison, and they were throwing a party to debut the baby she had died to save. It was grotesque. It was a public relations move designed to cement Evan as the grieving, single father and Rowan as the benevolent grandmother. "It's a trap," Hector said, reading the screen. "They want you there to humiliate you. If you cause a scene, they get a restraining order. If you don't show up, they tell everyone you don't care about the baby." "I know," I said, reaching for my coat. "But a party is where people drink. It is where they get comfortable. And it is where they talk." I hit reply. I will be there. I wasn't going there to make peace. I was going there to wear a wire. The Hale residence looked like a Christmas card brought to life by an unlimited budget. The Tudor-style house in Williamsville was draped in tasteful white lights, and the driveway was packed with luxury SUVs. I handed my coat to a server who looked too young to be working this late and stepped into the living room. The air smelled of expensive perfume and spruce. I spotted them immediately near the towering Christmas tree. Evan was holding a glass of champagne, nodding solemnly as a neighbour patted his arm. but my eyes were drawn to the woman standing next to him. It was Paige Mercer. She was holding a bundle wrapped in a soft pink blanket. She looked radiant, playing the part of the supportive figure perfectly. But then I looked at what she was wearing. It was a camel-coloured cashmere cardigan with a distinct pearl button collar. My breath hitched. I had bought that cardigan for Tessa 3 years ago. It was her favourite. Paige was not just holding my granddaughter. She was wearing my daughter-in-law's clothes, while Tessa lay in a hospital bed 5 miles away. I moved closer, weaving through the crowd. The snippets of conversation I caught were like shards of glass. Such a tragedy about his wife. But Paige has been a rock. Evan is lucky to have someone who can step up so quickly. They were not mourning Tessa. They were replacing her. They were rewriting the script before the body was even cold, normalizing the sight of Paige in Tessa's place. I stopped 3 feet from them. Paige looked up, her smile faltering when she saw my face. She clutched the baby tighter. "That is my grandchild," I said. I did not scream, but I pitched my voice just right so that it cut through the low hum of jazz music. The room went dead silent. Heads turned. Evan froze, his face draining of colour. "Mom," Evan hissed, his voice trembling. You shouldn't be here. And you shouldn't be letting your mistress wear your wife's clothes while she is still breathing," I said, pointing a shaking finger at Paige. "Give me my granddaughter." Rowan Hale appeared out of nowhere, stepping in front of Evan and Paige like a human shield. She didn't look angry. She looked pitying. She turned to the crowd, her voice trembling with a practiced sorrow. "I am so sorry. Everyone," Rowan said, pressing a hand to her chest. "Marianne is. She is having a very hard time accepting reality. She is unwell. She is insulting our family because she is in pain." She looked at the private security guard standing by the archway and gave a subtle nod. "Please," Rowan whispered to me, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't make us do this." The guard grabbed my elbow. His grip was iron. "Let go of me," I shouted, thrashing my arm. "You are thieves. All of you. You are stealing her life. I let them drag me. I let my heels scuff the hardwood floor. I let the guests see a hysterical, broken woman being ejected from a polite society gathering. I needed them to believe I was out of control. If they thought I was crazy, they wouldn't think I was dangerous." The heavy front door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the warmth and the light. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the cold wind dry the fake tears on my cheeks. I straightened my coat. The performance was over. I pulled out my phone. A message from Hector was waiting for me. "Tracker is live. Audio is clear." She made a call from the car 5 minutes before she entered the house. I walked to my car, parked down the street in the shadows. I plugged in my earbuds and opened the audio file Hector had uploaded to the secure server. Rowan's voice filled my ears, crisp and arrogant. "Yes, the transfer is complete. The hospital is managed. We are moving to the next phase of Project Cradle. Ensure the Meridian Family Endowment receives the final signature by the 30th. We cannot have any loose ends when the observation window closes." I paused the recording. My blood ran cold. Project Cradle. It wasn't just a family dispute. It wasn't just an affair. I remembered Tessa complaining months ago about a massive non-profit audit she was working on, something about funds being diverted from foster care programs into private accounts. She had mentioned Meridian. Evan wasn't afraid of a divorce. He was afraid of a federal indictment. They weren't killing Tessa because they hated her. They were killing her because she was the only witness to a financial crime that would destroy them all. The clock was ticking louder than my own heartbeat. It was day 24 of the 30-day window. Every hour that passed was another shovel of dirt on Tessa's grave, and another step toward the erasure of a child I had never met. I caught Callie Rourke near the hospital vending machines. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She dropped a packet of peanuts, and when I bent down to help her pick it up, she whispered fast and low, "The NICU printer log." She breathed, not looking at me. It generated 2 wristband codes at birth, but the family only claimed 1. There is a ghost in the system. Marianne. I straightened up and walked away without a word, but my hands were clenched into fists in my pockets. Baby B. I went straight to Hector. He had set up a command center in his dining room, surrounded by stacks of paper and empty coffee cups. He held up a printout as soon as I walked in. "You were right," Hector said, his voice grim. "Medical records confirm a twin gestation, but the file for the second infant has been flagged as restricted access by the legal guardian. That is Evan. Why hide a baby?" I asked, pacing the room. "Why keep one and hide the other?" "Because 2 babies means 2 birth certificates," Hector said. 2 social security numbers, 2 paper trails. If they are trying to launder money through a family endowment, an extra heir complicates the math. They need a clean narrative. 1 mother who died tragically, 1 surviving miracle baby. The second child is a variable they didn't account for. We listened to the audio feed from the bug Hector had planted in Evan's office. The quality was grainy, but the desperation was clear. "We cannot have 2 of them. Evan." Rowan's voice crackled through the speakers. "It raises questions. People count months. They ask about prenatal care. We need to solve the second variable before the 30 days are up." Then I heard Paige. She sounded young and terrified. I don't want to be involved in the hospital part anymore." Paige stammered. "You said we were just protecting assets. You didn't say we were getting rid of a baby." "Too late," Evan snapped. His voice was cold, stripped of the charm he used to fool me. "You signed the intake forms. You are in this as deep as we are. I needed to buy time. I needed them to lower their guard so they would make the final mistake. I decided to play the only card they expected from me defeat. I made a very public appointment with a family law attorney known for high-profile settlements. I made sure Rowan's network would hear about it. I walked into that office looking like a woman who had been broken. I sat in the glass-walled conference room, shoulders hunched, weeping into a tissue. I just want it to stop. I told the receptionist loudly, "I want to waive my intervention rights. I want to sign the paper that says I won't contest the medical proxy. I just want to say goodbye to Tessa and leave." Rowan would hear this within the hour. She would think the threat was neutralized. She would think the path was clear to kill my daughter-in-law on day 30. But inside the lawyer's office, I wasn't signing a waiver. I was signing a deferred petition for independent ethical oversight. It was a legal landmine. The document stated that if the patient's status changed, or if support was withdrawn without a full board review, an automatic injunction would be filed. I dated it to activate at 8 in the morning on day 30. I walked out of the office feeling lighter. The trap was set. That night, the audio bug in Rowan's car caught the final piece of the puzzle. She was on the phone, her voice smooth and businesslike. "Yes, the arrangements are made," Rowan said. "A private placement in Pennsylvania. Closed records. The adopting family understands the need for discretion. The donation to the endowment will cover the fees. We will transport the package on the morning of the 30th, right after the hospital matter is concluded. I froze. The package. She was talking about my grandson. They are selling him, I whispered to the empty air of my apartment. They are trading him for silence. I looked at the calendar on my wall. Day 29 was tomorrow. I wasn't going to stop them from walking into the trap. I was going to let them walk right into the center of it. And then I was going to burn their whole world down. The waiting was the hardest part of the job. It was a slow, grinding torture that tested the limits of my sanity. Every night for the last week. I established a ritual. I arrived at the hospital at 3 a.m, the hour when the human spirit is weakest and the shadows are longest. I stood outside the glass wall of the ICU, staring at Tessa. I could not go in, but I could make sure I was the only thing she saw if she opened her eyes. I spoke to the glass, my voice a low murmur that vibrated against the pain. You promised me. Tessa, I whispered, pressing my palm against the cold surface. You told me you were going to burn Meridian down. You said, Marianne, if I do this, I need you to be my witness. Well, I am here. I am witnessing. So you need to wake up. Callie Rourke became my silent partner in this vigil. She never acknowledged me directly when the cameras were turning, but she moved with a deliberate choreography. If security was doing rounds on the north wing, she would leave a cart of linens in the south hallway to block their view of me. If Rowan or Evan showed up unexpectedly, she would page a code blue in the adjacent ward to create a distraction, giving me time to slip into the stairwell. On the 28th night, I saw it. I was watching Tessa's hand, the one resting on the blue blanket. Her index finger twitched. It was not a spasm. It was a curl, deliberate and slow. Then, her eyes moved beneath her lids. They shifted to the left, tracking the sound of a nurse dropping a chart, then back to center. She is in there, I said to myself, my heart hammering against my ribs. The doctors called it a vegetative state because that was the diagnosis Evan paid them to see. But I saw something else. I saw locked-in syndrome. She was awake. She was screaming inside her own body, and her husband was planning to pull the plug before she could make a sound. By the next afternoon, Hector had finalized the kill file. We sat in his car, the heater battling the buffalo freeze. We have the bank transfers, Hector said, tapping a thick manila folder. We have the audio of Rowan admitting to the adoption scheme in Pennsylvania. We have the timeline of the proxy change. But the big show is tomorrow. Tomorrow, I repeated. Rowan scheduled the meeting with the hospital board for 10 a.m. on day 30, Hector said. That is the moment the legal window closes. They walk in, sign the papers to withdraw support, and hand over the baby to the brokers by noon. My phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was an unknown number. I answered it, putting it on speaker. Hello, I can't. The voice was breathless and terrified. It was Paige. Paige, I said, leaning forward. Paige, listen to me. You don't have to do this. He says it's too late. She sobbed, her voice breaking. He says if I leave, I go to jail too. I didn't know about the baby. Marianne, I swear. The line went dead. She is cracking, Hector observed grimly. The person who is most afraid is always the first one to break. She will be there tomorrow, and she will be our wild card. I went back to my apartment to prepare for the final act. I opened my laptop to check a shared cloud drive. Tessa and I used to swap photos and recipes. I was looking for a picture of her to bring to the board meeting, something to humanize the victim. I found a folder I had never seen before. It was labeled simply Insurance. I opened it. Inside was a single audio file and a scheduled command script. The upload date was the day she went into labor. I clicked play. Tessa's voice filled my kitchen, strong and clear, recorded before the silence took her. If you are listening to this, I have been unreachable for 72 hours. This recording has been automatically sent to the Hospital Ethics Board, the State Attorney General, and the Internal Auditor of the Meridian Family Endowment. My husband, Evan Caldwell, and his mother-in-law, Rowan Hale, are diverting funds meant for state foster care. If I am dead, or if I am incapacitated, look at them. Look at the money. I checked the release timer on the script. It was set to execute at 9:58 in the morning on day 30, 2 minutes before they planned to kill her. Tessa was going to speak from the grave. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to scream anymore. I just needed to be in that room when the bomb went off. The night of the 29th was a blur of shadows and gasoline fumes. Hector and I sat in his sedan, parked 50 yards away from a dimly lit loading dock behind an abandoned textile factory. It was the kind of place people went when they wanted to trade things that did not belong to them. At 11 o'clock, Rowan's luxury SUV pulled in. A minute later, a nondescript grey van arrived. A man got out, and Rowan handed him a thick envelope. Hector adjusted the lens of his long-range camera. Got the plate, he muttered. Pennsylvania plates, that's the broker. Through the directional microphone. Rowan's voice cut through the static, sharp and dismissive. The cash is clean enough. Just make sure the pickup happens at noon tomorrow. I don't want the package sitting in the hospital nursery a second longer than necessary. My stomach churned. She was talking about a baby like it was a shipment of contraband. I reached for the door handle, ready to run out there and tear her apart. But Hector grabbed my arm. Not yet, he said. If you stop it now, it's just a misunderstanding. It's a donation. It's an adoption discussion. We need them to sign the papers at the hospital. We need the crime to be completed on paper. I sat back, forcing myself to breathe. The choice was agonizing. To wait was to gamble with lives, but to act too soon was to let them walk away free. Then, my phone lit up. It was a text from Paige, just an image. It was a photo of a document, the medical proxy giving Evan full control over Tessa's life. Beneath it, she had typed, I saw Rowan print this the night of the 25th. Tessa was already in the coma. It's a forgery. I can't go to prison for murder. That was the nail in the coffin. They weren't just exploiting a tragedy. They had manufactured the legal authority to execute it. I went back to the hospital one last time before the sun came up. Callie met me at the service elevator. She's fighting. Marianne, Callie whispered as we walked briskly down the hallway. Her heart rate spikes when we mention the baby. She is locked in, but she is listening. I slipped into the room. The machines hummed their rhythmic, indifferent song. I leaned over the rail and put my lips right next to Tessa's ear. I know you can hear me, I said, my voice fierce and low. The cavalry is coming. But I need you to fight. When they walk in that door tomorrow to try and silence you, I need you to get angry. Show them you are still here. I left the room just as the clock struck 3:40 in the morning. At that exact moment, miles away in a secure server room, A digital timer hit 0. Tessa's insurance file executed its command. The email with the audio attachment was blasted out to the entire board of St. Brigid Medical Centre, the State Attorney General, and the Internal Risk Officer at the Meridian Family Endowment. Rowan and Evan were asleep, dreaming of their clean getaway. They had no idea that the dead woman had just started speaking. The panic started 3 hours later. We were intercepting the calls from the van. What do you mean there is a recording? Evan's voice was high and thin, verging on hysteria. Meridian just called me. They said they received an audio file from Tessa's private email. They are asking about the audit. Shut up. Evan Rowan roared back, her composure finally fracturing. It is a bluff. She is brain dead, a computer error. We stick to the plan. We go to the hospital. We sign the withdrawal of support, and we cremate her before anyone can ask questions. Once the body is gone, there is no proof. Finish the hospital job first. But, Evan stammered, what if the police? Move, Rowan screamed. I stood in the hospital lobby with Hector and a lawyer we had retained an hour ago. We watched the sliding doors. We weren't there to stop them from entering. We were the walls of the maze, waiting for the rats to run right into the center. They are coming, Hector said, checking his watch. It is showtime. I straightened my jacket. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt the cold, hard certainty of justice. They were walking in to kill a mother, but they were going to find a grandmother waiting to bury them. It was 9:58 in the morning. The air in the ICU room was electric, charged with the kind of static that comes before a lightning strike. Callie adjusted the pillows, propping Tessa up just enough so she was facing the door. Tessa looked frail, a ghost in a hospital gown, but her eyes were open. They were not the glassy, vacant eyes of the vegetative state Evan had claimed. They were focused. They were aware. She was a living accusation waiting to happen. The double doors swung open at exactly 10 o'clock. Rowan led the charge, her heels clicking on the linoleum like gunshots. Evan followed, clutching a leather folder containing the termination of life support papers. Paige brought up the rear, looking like she was walking to the gallows, her face grey and slick with sweat. Let's get this done quickly, Rowan said, not even looking at the bed. She marched toward the attending physician. The funeral home is waiting for the call. We need the signature now. Then she turned, and she froze. Evan looked past her shoulder. He saw his wife. He saw her eyes lock onto his. The expensive fountain pen in his hand slipped through his sweat-slicked fingers and clattered onto the floor, the sound echoing like a gavel drop in the silent room. She's awake, Evan whispered, the colour draining from his face until he looked like the corpse they wanted Tessa to be. Mum, she's looking at me. Rowan recovered instantly. She was a predator who refused to be cornered. She stepped forward, blocking Evan's view of the bed. She is not lucid. This is a reflex. It changes nothing. We have the medical proxy. We have the legal authority to decide what is best for her dignity. I stepped out from the shadows of the corner where I had been waiting. You have nothing. Rowan, I said. Rowan sneered at me. I told you to leave. Security, and I told you that a forged proxy is just a felony, I said calmly, stepping between her and my daughter-in-law. It doesn't give you authority. It gives you a prison sentence. Before Rowan could scream, the door to the adjoining observation room opened. Hector walked out, flanked by a man in a sharp suit and the head of the hospital's ethics board. Mrs. Hale. the board member said, holding up a tablet. At 4 o'clock this morning, the hospital server received a scheduled audio file from the patient. It details financial coercion and a threat to her life. We have also received a preservation order from the district attorney regarding the Meridian family endowment. Rowan wheeled around to Paige. Call the lawyers. Now Paige didn't move. She reached into her bag, but instead of a phone, she pulled out a folder. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I'm not calling anyone. Rowan, Paige said. She walked past Evan and handed the folder to Hector. Here is the metadata from the printer log. It proves the proxy was created 3 days after Tessa was admitted. And here are the emails where you told me to delete the draft. Rowan looked at Paige with pure venom. You stupid girl, you are destroying yourself. Better than destroying a baby. Paige shot back, tears finally spilling over. That is enough, Hector said. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the room. Rowan Hale, Evan Caldwell. You are under arrest. We have the wire transfer records from the joint account. We have the audio of you selling the second infant to a broker in Pennsylvania. And now, we have the witness. Evan collapsed into the visitor's chair, burying his face in his hands. He didn't look at his wife. He couldn't. As the officers read Rowan her rights, I turned to Callie Rourke. There was one question I had never asked, one loose thread in the tapestry. Why did you come to me that night? Callie, I asked softly. You risked your license. You didn't know me. Why Callie walked over to the bedside table and picked up the patient intake form, the original one, filled out weeks before the birth. She flipped it over to the emergency contact section. I didn't break protocol. Mrs. Caldwell, Callie said. I followed it. She pointed to a handwritten note in the margin, in Tessa's handwriting. It listed my name as the primary protector. Underneath, she had written one single sentence, if I disappear, trust her more than my family. I felt the tears sting my eyes. I looked at Tessa. She was crying too, silent tears tracking down her pale cheeks. She managed to move her lips. It was a struggle, a fight against her own body, but she forced the air out. That's right, Tessa whispered. I took her hand and squeezed it. It wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a promise kept. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Grandma's Family Diary. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below, sharing your city or country, and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and smash the hype button to help this video get discovered by more people who love a good drama.